Hi there, guys. Just wanted to pick up on an article in The Guardian today talking about how our MPs are facing, huge levels of abuse in their jobs and the potential impact on young people considering politics as a career. So let's have a look at the article here then. So it says MPs and political candidates are facing industrial levels of intimidation and harassment, a minister has warned, as the government outlines plans for stricter punishments for those found guilty of abuse. Rushanara Ali, the Minister for Democracy, said her colleagues were suffering worse harassment than ever before and warned this was deterring many young people from becoming politically active. And then obviously she talks about Joe Cox and Sir David Amess, who were sadly killed over recent years. So going on, it says that MPs say that the harassment that they're experiencing is not related to a single political cause and is due more to a fragmented electorate who increasingly distrust their MPs while finding it easier than ever to contact or find them. And then continuing, she says, I spent my whole life campaigning to encourage people into politics. Young people, women, people from diverse backgrounds, men and women. And I fear that if we don't take action, then more and more people will be put off. And then later in the article, she goes on to talk about what the government and Parliament are proposing in terms of actually tackling this issue. But I just wanted to think about this more widely, really, and consider, potential other reasons for why young people might not be going into politics. I think, firstly, from my analysis, I'd say that probably whilst abuse is one factor, why young people might not be going into politics, I'd suggest there are a number of other factors which may be more important or more salient in terms of preventing young people from entering politics. I think I'll try and break it down into a few different areas. So firstly, over the last 30 to 40 years, we've had the professionalisation of politics. So typically, that means that politicians, now they often have to take a set path to becoming an MP. So perhaps the typical route is, they might work up through a constituency party, then they would become a special advisor, and then finally they'd be nominated for candidacy and then put up for election. And then we also have the fact that leaders and various factions within a party will promote their favoured faction or promote candidates from their favoured faction, or will look to control their party through the selection process to make party management more easy, in government. And then linked to that, we also then have the role of the media and sort of image management. In practice, that means that candidates have to always sort of be on message and present themselves in a certain way. And all of that might be a big turn-off to a young person, particularly someone from an ordinary background, looking at politics as a potential career path. The cost of what I've just described is that most MPs are now being drawn from professional backgrounds. So typically that's, and most recently in Parliament, that's been the legal profession, politics and public affairs, business, finance, and the media and journalism. So yes, of course, you want people from those backgrounds in Parliament, but do we want most of our elected representatives being drawn from those narrow circles? I'm not sure that we do. And then secondly, so as a result of that process of professionalisation, there are now fewer working class voices in Parliament. That's a fact, as compared to, say, the 1970s. And if people don't see people like them in Parliament, then their obvious conclusion is going to be that politics is not for them. So we do actually have some greater working class representation in Parliament more recently, particularly with the new intake of Labour MPs, who are much less likely to have attended public school, for example, than the Tories. And famously, Angela Rayner, she's made it to deputy leader of the Labour Party. And she was a single mum and a carer in her early life. But that doesn't change the fact that politics looks, from the outside at least, as the preserve of a wealthy elite. And even a lot of the new MPs who are from less privileged backgrounds or who haven't attended public school, for example, they will have been handpicked by Starmer's team because of their willingness to toe the party line and be loyal to the leadership. And then finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, we know now without doubt that politics in the UK has failed and is continuing to fail. So living standards in the UK have declined. Our quality of life has been reduced over many years. High streets are run down, our infrastructure's old and tatty, and we're ripped off at every turn. And how has politics protected us from those processes or tried to push back in the interests of ordinary people? I would say it hasn't at all. So in that sense, I think, politics, it no longer meets the needs of citizens, and actually it doesn't even try. So why would a young person looking at that want to move into politics as a career if they think they're just going to be presiding over more managed decline and are not going to be able to change anything for the better. So it's a really interesting topic that this article raises. And of course, I don't condone any sort of abuse to MPs, but I think this sort of skin deep reading of why young people are not entering politics is sort of indicative of the calibre of our politicians, really. And it's a shame that they haven't looked at some of those wider processes that I've mentioned, because then they could potentially be looking at making politics a more attractive profession, actually changing politics for the better. But anyway, lots to think about. So thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you next time.